Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm Amethyst Rune Witch and today I'm going to be talking to you about witchcraft and persecution. So this is literally going to be a mini history lesson. So let's get started. It's going to be a bit of a meaty one, lots of information. But I hope you enjoy this. I hope it gives you more of an idea of how history has written witchcraft into its books. Sorry, that's Luna. Hello, Luna. What are you doing? My Luna. What are you doing? Oh, you're just sitting there, are you? Okay. Oh no, she's curling up. She's going to curl up somewhere else. But anyway, so witchcraft and persecution over the centuries. Now, witchcraft was something that had been feared and hated for a very long time, but particularly by Christians. Now, I'm not saying every Christian is against witches, but over history, over time, there's been more against witchcraft than for it. And even today, witches are still a target because we have an identity that's beyond our own existence. We're sort of stood between worlds, depending on how your craft is. Now, the Inquisition started in around about the 1400s, when the focus shifted from Jews and other heretics towards witches, or those who were believed to be witches. But it was in the 1200s when Pope Gregory IX actually authorised the killing of witches. It just didn't quite catch on then. In 1484, Pope Innocent VIII said that witches existed, but it was heresy to say different. But that went against 906, when church law stated that belief in witchcraft was heresy. So, did it or didn't it exist? In the space of not even 600 years, they've gone from, no, it doesn't exist, if you believe it does, you're a heretic, to, it does exist, and now you're a heretic if you say it doesn't. But it was because of these church laws that a lot of women and some men were tortured and killed in order to get a confession from them of there being witches in some form. And the creation of devil worship, which I have actually, since I started wearing this last year, since wearing my pentacle, I came out to some of my neighbours, and one of them actually said, "Oh, you're not into all that devil stuff, are you?" And I'm like, that's a typical prejudice. That's a typical stereotyping that heralds back to the 1400s, because devil worship and the subsequent persecution of devil worship gave the church more authority to target women. Now, why was it women who were targeted? Because we, as witches back then, didn't answer to God. We didn't answer to our husbands or our fathers or whoever the head of the house or the head of the family was. We were separate in that sense. Most of what was deemed witchcraft was fictional and created by the church, although some were and are real practices of pagans. The church also, back in, I want to say 601 AD, with Pope Gregory, who sent letters out to missionaries across the world stating that any pagan item, whether it was a tree, a temple, a particular site, all of those things were to be made Christian. They were to be turned into Christian things, temples, sites, etc., so that it would be easier to bring those pagans from their paganism into Christianity. It was that crossover link that was made. But what's funny is that the Old English word for witch is Wicca, which was applied to men and women who followed a masculine and feminine and had earthly aspects of God. Now, this Wiccan or Wicca has become popular. It's become a popular and recognised religion since, I think it was the 1960s. But the tradition had both heaven and earth, if you want to call it heaven, this world and the next, with no hierarchy or authority, which meant it was a challenge to the Christian church because their authority was God. The next one down was the preacher. And then it was, the congregation. But what I think is quite interesting is that anyone who was seen to be following Mary, whether, I'm not entirely sure whether that's Mary, Mother of God, or Mary Magdalene, they were also suspected for promoting the feminine aspect, because the church believed in a very, very masculine order. Women were supposed to be subservient to men within the patriarchy and within church hierarchy. Women came just above children, but they still answered to their husbands, their fathers, then to the preacher, then to God. There was no stepping to one side and bypassing husband, father, preacher to get to God straight. You had to go through those channels. Anyone with different beliefs to the Christian church was attacked, whether it was because they believed in same-sex marriage, same-sex relationships, because within that bubble, within those ideas, if you've got two women in a relationship, and this is how it read to me, is that if there were two women or two men in a relationship who took on children, adopted children, foster children, however, who would be the father, the head of the house, the head of the family? Who would be the mother? Who would be that lower feminine aspect? There was no hierarchy within that. So, of course, homosexuality was going to be attacked. Because it didn't make sense in the eyes, in the minds of those who ran the church. It just didn't make sense to them. And even today, a lot of persecution comes from traditional family values, where women's place was under male dominance. And church records of witchcraft do give witches a much simpler way of life, with witches standing on their heads during their their conversation with their higher power, their higher being, whilst Christians kneeled. They bowed in deference. The Black Mass became a thing versus Holy Communion. The sacraments, the holy sacraments, were against the excrement of witchcraft. And, you're going from something pure and holy to something really not nice. We all do it, but it's not the point. So then we come to the 1480s. Do you believe it was 1486? 1486, I nearly said 84 then. But the Malleus Maleficarum was published in 1486, which gave a lurid description of witches, what they did, but what's written within the Malleus Maleficarum could rival any modern science fiction fantasy works today. And women bore the worst of the brunt of this, as they were seen to be treacherous and contemptible. If you thought that the Christian God was not the only power above, any person, that was it. You had to be a witch. And even the act of sex got involved. Because according to the Malleus Maleficarum, and the two lovely German gentlemen who wrote it, witchcraft comes from a carnal lust that is insatiable for women, and because of this insatiable desire that women had, witches were supposed to collect male parts in birds' nests, or they'd just collect them somewhere. There's even an account from Odo of Cluny, who said that to embrace a woman is to embrace a sack of manure, because women were in the way of true spirituality and a true union with God. Which goes to show that the church had massive long-term prejudices against women. And that was partially vented when devil worship was constructed. But the thing is, it's not devil worship. And I think that's the difference. So when the witch trials came along, it was believed that all witches were followers of Satan, instead of being the healers, teachers, midwives, etc., that women had been seen as previous to the trials. And so they were treated as heretics. They would have been tortured to get confessions. Witches suffered worse even than Jews and other heretics of the time. And even the children of convicted witches would have suffered. They would have been, cast out of their communities. And if those children ever made it to another town, they'd have to give themselves new names. Otherwise, they'd be recognised. Their parents' names would be recognised. And the witch trials weren't just in Europe. We know that the Salem witch trials happened. They are some of the most famous trials around the world. But these trials are an example of what happens when ignorant people go crazy in a mob, or in multiple mobs in, different towns, different cities. But they're also encouraged by the ignorant, power-hungry leaders. Sorry, I've got a hair floating around. I think I got it. But did you know that the last witch hunts haven't yet finished? Witches in some countries are still persecuted for believing in something different. In 1928, so not even 100 years ago, a Hungarian family was found not guilty of killing an old lady they believed to be a witch. In 1976, a German woman was cast out of her community because she apparently had familiars, had animal familiars, and the people of her town threw stones at her and killed the animals. In 1977, a Frenchman was killed because he was suspected of sorcery. So as I was saying, in 1981, this mob stoned a woman in Mexico for being a witch because her witchcraft, what she did within her craft, supposedly led to an attack on the Pope. Now, there was no proof, there was no solid, concrete proof of this, but because they suspected her, she got stoned. That's 31 years ago. Sorry, 31. 30 years ago. 30 years ago, and this all stems from the church's creation of their idea of witchcraft. It was too feminine for them. It promoted the idea of women being equal to men. You know, it didn't fit within the patriarchal society that the church wanted. And devil worship got brought in. And that's why it took the heaviest toll, and one of the bloodiest tolls actually, on humanity. So I'm sorry if that's really, really down and dark and not nice, but history isn't all rainbows and glitter and all that sort of thing. It is quite dark and not nice. So I hope you've learnt something. Hope you've learnt about the history of witchcraft through the ages. And I shall see you again next week for another video. So stay safe and blessed be.